Hi, welcome to my workshop. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this adjustable tenon jig. It's simpler than you think. Stick around to the end, we'll show you how to actually do tenon joinery with it. I put the detailed material list in the description for your reference should you want to build this jig. The first cut we're going to make is we're going to do a through slot on the main board. It's got to be centered in the board from left to right, and then you don't want to go all the way to the end. So I'm going to do a 9-inch slot, and I'm going to make it the same width as the collet that I'm going to be using on the router. And you'll need to use a collet on your router so that you don't cut into your jig. So for me, it's going to be a 3/4 inch slot, 9 inches long. I've set up the router so that the bit is centered on the board, and I put a pencil mark on a piece of tape in 2 locations here. So this will be where I drop the board down, and then this one here will be where I lift the board up. The other thing is I don't want to blow this piece of wood out. It's plywood, so I'm going to go halfway through, and then I'm going to turn the board over and go halfway through the other side. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so as you can see, we got the slot cut all the way through. Now, if you don't want to use a router setup like this, you could just drill 2 3/4 inch holes with a Forstner bit and connect those and cut it through with a jigsaw. You just want to make sure you're precise so you don't get a lot of slop in this groove with the collet. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut 2 slots about approximately 2 inches from each end to house one of our TTRcks, and those will hold the wing panels or the clamping wings on, right? So we'll get those cut out first, and we've set up the fence back here so that it is 2 inches on center, and then the only other thing we have to do is set the height of our bit. You can see here that I love this woodpecker lift. It micro adjusts really nice. Okay, so we've got our depth, and we'll push this through with an extra piece of scrap just to keep it from blowing out. So here we go. So as you can see, that TTRck fits in there really nice. And once again, if you don't have a router set up and you want to still do this, you can do it on a table saw with either a dado blade or taking several passes with a regular blade to cut these slots. So we move the fence forward, and we're giving ourselves about 1 inch from the center of the bit to cut the 2 slots that we're going to run this way on the opposite side of the board, and we're going to cut those all the way through. So let's go ahead and do that. One of the things that you've got to think about, which I didn't, is the placement of the holes in relation to the track that's going to be on the opposite side. So in this particular example, the holes that were in the TTRck happen to line up with this, so I've got no material. It's almost like paper thin to put the screws in. So I had to go back and drill new holes and countersink so that I could fasten these in. So we're going to go ahead and get these installed here, pop in a couple of screws to hold them in place, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now that we've got our TTRck installed, we've got to mark out where we're going to drill the through holes. So we're going to drill holes through this board, 1/4 inch all the way through, and then for the stops, we've got to do the same thing. We've got to drill through here. So let's go drill these holes, and then we're ready for some assembly work. One more step before assembly. We have to mark off the center so that we have something to align the boards to. And what I like to do is use put a little knife mark so it doesn't rub off. And then you can trace it with a pencil too to give it some color. But if it ever rubs off, you got the knife mark that you can go back to and use. And then you're going to want to extend that mark down. Try and turn this so you guys can see. Just extend that mark down. Now we're ready for assembly. There you have it. To get started, the first thing you have to do is determine where you want to put the tenon. So line up the two boards, create a mark where you want the tenon to be centered, and then wrap that mark around so that you can determine your center mark. The other thing you want to note is the face side of the board. So I just put an F on the face side because when you clamp it in the jig, you're always going to want that side of the board facing you. This way, if you're off center by a little bit from the thickness perspective, at least the tenon will line up. And then we're going to take our jig, place it on top. You're going to want to center onto this line as close as you can. While holding this by hand, go underneath and tighten up the back clamp. Then do the same thing on the front, holding the board tight. So now the clamps are in. You'll see that this can move back and forth. So now we want to just line it up with that line. Once that's done, just take one clamp. You could do one on each side, but the goal of putting the clamp on here is just to make sure that this doesn't slide back and forth. Now at this point, the jig is secure. The next thing you want to do is determine what stock you're going to use to make your tenons out of. So I got this piece of scrap white oak that I'm going to use, and this is 1.5 inches thick, so I'm going to do 1.5 inches tenon. The way to determine the placement of your stops is the next step, and in order to do that, I take the diameter of my router base, which is 5 3/4, and the stock that I'm going to use to make the tenon is 1.5 inches. So between those two, it adds up to 7 1/4. Divide that by 2, and that's the distance from the center line to your stop on either side that you want to set these at. So in my case, I want to set these at 3 5/8 from the center line. So we're going to go 3 5/8. Do the same thing on this side. And that will give me the travel distance that I need from left to right to cut 1.5 inches wide tenon slot. The next thing to do is to set your depth of cut on your router. So I'm going to set my router in here. The collets in between. I'm going to drop it down till the bit just touches. So I've now zeroed out. And then I'm going to set my depth gauge to 1 inch, and I'm going to step it down until I get to depth, because you don't want to drill everything all at once. When it comes to cutting the tenon, the thickness of the tenon is going to be more important than the length of the tenon, the width of the tenon, because you want the face-to-face glue. The edges aren't really going to make that big of a difference. So we're going to go ahead and cut this just heavy of 1/4 inch, and then we'll test fit it before we round over the edges. If you don't have a bandsaw, you could do this on a table saw as well. To round over the edges of the tenon, you could just use a hand plane and round them over this way. It doesn't have to be exact, it just has to fit inside the slot. Or if it's easier, you can put a round over bit in your router and just run the edges through the router. A nice snug fit. So we're going to cut this. We went 1 inch in, so I just got to cut the tenon off. So remember, we said the face side has to be the same. So we've got the face side here. I'm gonna a little glue, and we're good. Well, there you have it. A strong, simple joint to build with the right tools. And in this case, it was this easy to make jig to cut a loose tenon joint. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd appreciate a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't, so I can bring you more content. Thanks for watching.